The Boy and the Heron is a masterwork of storytelling. Like the greatest of Miyazaki's films, The Boy and the Heron is on the surface essentially a coming-of-age story, but it is also a film full of symbols that point away from itself towards its meaning. Just as Mahito goes on a fantastical journey of discovery, the best way to explore The Boy and the Heron is to journey through the layers of this film. G-Kids released an introduction to The Boy and the Heron with these words: "A young boy named Mahito, yearning for his mother, ventures into a world shared by the living and the dead. There, death comes to an end and life finds a new beginning. A semi-autobiographical fantasy about life, death, and creation, in tribute to friendship from the mind of Hayao Miyazaki." There had been an interview circulating that was released December 16th, 2023, where Hayao Miyazaki had stated that The Boy and the Heron is a metaphorical autobiography of himself, his producer, Toshiro Suzuki, and late friend and Ghibli co-founder, Isao Takahata, represented by the various characters. There are certainly autobiographical aspects to this film. Miyazaki was himself born in Tokyo in 1941, around the time of the film from which Mahito's perspective is set during the Second World War. Miyazaki's earliest memories were of city bombings, and he felt like an outsider. His father, Katsuji, worked as the director of an airplane company, Miyazaki Airplane, which was a subcontractor for the larger company Mitsubishi Heavy Industries. Miyazaki Airplane was involved in the production of parts for the Mitsubishi A6M0 fighter planes used by the Japanese Navy during World War II. Miyazaki's mother, Dola, suffered from spinal tuberculosis when he was a child, but she did not die from it. In fact, Miyazaki was 42 when his mother died. We might first be introduced to these themes in My Neighbor Totoro, when the mother, Yasuko, is hospitalized throughout the duration of the film, and Naoko in The Wind Rises has and dies from tuberculosis. When we see Naoko at the end of the film, she tells Jiro, "You must live," and Jiro silently nods. If Jiro had wondered how, then it might be answered by Miyazaki's next film, The Boy and the Heron, as a tale of resilience from grief. However, all of this is premise, not story. When we consider these aspects, it doesn't explain very much about the artistic choices which are made with the film, nor the substance of those artistic choices. When we create a work, we splinter ourselves into the fragmentation that becomes its characters, and we project ourselves into the worlds we create. Every work of art is a portrait. All writers put their own life and the people they know into their work, so it's not a very interesting way of looking at the film, and these sources alone cannot manifest the film which we see as an end result. According to the 2023 book, The Story of Studio Ghibli, edited by producer Toshiro Suzuki, Miyazaki handed in a proposal for the film to Suzuki in July 2016 based on The Book of Lost Things, a 2006 novel for children by Irish writer John Connolly, and Suzuki, who had read the book, thought that it was a suitable feature-length film. The plot of the book shares much similarity with The Boy and the Heron, to the extent that Studio Ghibli are somewhat deflecting this similarity by anchoring it in Miyazaki's own personal parallel circumstances, and instead sharing the title with Genzaburo Yoshino's novel How Do You Live, which the film shares little resemblance to. I also strongly feel that what an artist intends a work to be is not what it ends up as. Creativity, I believe, is largely a subconscious mind at play, and no matter what you intend to invest your work with, you later realize what defines it are the things that you did not intend. Creativity is inspiration at play, not the conscious and rational self at work. The artist works in a blind ecstasy, no matter what the sober critic in them wants the art to be. The world of Miyazaki films are notoriously Shinto, more so than they are Buddhist like most great Japanese films prior to the 1970s. It matters little that Miyazaki has stated he doesn't identify as being a religious person. Of all the arts, I think anyone can know someone by asking them to write a story, because it reflects so directly to you how you truthfully see and experience the world. It will reveal to you things you really think are important to strive to do and be, how you see life and death, and define good from bad. It will tell you everything about your values and perspectives. Storytelling is neither lying nor the truth, but a composed experience. Storytelling is always religious. Atheistic narratives don't exist. Storytelling is about perceptions of experiences, how to give meaning to an experience, and how to describe it emotionally in relay. Nothing has traversed deeper for an explanation for those curiosities of existence and human experience than religion. Storytelling of any region is informed by the prevalent or long-held religious traditions of that region. The whole canon of Western philosophy is but a footnote to Christian theology wrestling to maintain itself in modernity. It's important to discuss the overt differences between Western Abrahamic stories compared to Eastern Buddhist Shinto narratives. It's not so much that there is an Eastern-Western narrative, but that there are typical traits in popular work of either region. Rather than in typical Western narrative, wherein something material is attained, restored, and then there's a change of environment to something new, Great Eastern narrative is the reveal of a deeper, more contextual understanding of what already exists. A Western narrative often more or less results in a change that returns the harmony of the beginning, a status quo established, broken, and restored, which derives from the biblical narrative arc Eden, the Fall, New Eden in linear Abrahamic time. Whereas Eastern narrative, grown out of a very different religious culture, all with cyclical time, often ends in greater ambiguity or open ending due to being more concerned with a change of perspective by the end. Overall, I think Eastern narrative is able to deliver a better grasp of social and experiential reality simply because it's more concerned with reality, whereas Western storytelling is more of an escapist fantasy serving a parabolic purpose. In Western Abrahamic narrative, because the essence of the work's meaning grows out of parables, a writer crams the protagonist with ideals. The narrative tends to be linear, which makes it plot-focused, transitioning from point to point like a train passing through stations. This means a variety of incidents arise to round out the character, for the audience to make moral judgments, and then learn about the ideals the protagonist represents. Usually, the character is entirely defined by wanting to obtain something or arrive somewhere, or escape from something, or be with someone. The plot oscillates by obstacles to the protagonist achieving their goal by some personified or circumstantial resistance. In the end, the triumph or death of the protagonist is the triumph of the writer's ideals, celebrated or martyred. The takeaway is a parable of how to be or not to be, or what moral course to take in life. In comparison, Buddhist narratives are anti-idealistic, because in Buddhism, ideals are antithetical to reality. Ideals obscure reality by narrowly focusing on a desirable, limited perspective and reject what is undesirable. In Buddhist narratives, it's the meaning that prevails over suffering which is the point. Rather than something to gain, a new way of seeing is often the objective. The drama moves forward by exploring broader information that presents new scenario after new scenario. Information expands the scenario to the point of obliterating the previous pursuit of the character as they continuously realize their limited awareness of the situation. The broader they understand, the more we see a change in their objective. This usually makes a narrative feel like a Russian doll with a story within a story within a story. The narrative dives into themes which are explored by significant moments of contemplation and reflection. The takeaway is an insightful contemplation of reality and an unbroken reflection on humanity. In Shinto, Ashihara no Nakasukuni, a term applied to the plane of existence that exists between Takamagahara, plane of high heaven, and the Yomi, underworld, in other words, the realm of the living, Konoyo is a term literally meaning this world. Bushitsukai refers to broadly the corporeal world, literally translating as material world. Spirited Away would be more like the Rekai, invisible world of spiritual deities, whereas the Boy and the Heron is like the Anoyo, an afterlife of the deceased. In Shinto belief, all is one world. It is not metaphysical or dualistic in the Christian sense. The natural and supernatural are the one and the same world shared together, but split between the world we can see, the Kenkai, and the one we can't, the Yukai. Shinto believes all things are animate and everything has a kami. Kami are not gods in the Western sense, either Abrahamic or polytheistic, but animate spirits imbued in all things, whilst also the supernatural representation of those things. The phrase Yaoyoruzu no Kami, literally 8 million kami, means innumerable kami. Foxes and deer are considered messengers between the visible corporeal world and the invisible kami world. Shinto postures that every living human has both a kon, soul, and a haku, life force, that is attached to the body and returns to the earth after death. This is referred to as konpaku. Similar, a ki, which is a vital force forming part of any living thing, sei, the animated energy of any living things, kokoro, literally heart, is the essence of the thing or being. Utsushimi refers to the visible, physical form of a deity, and Utsushio refers to the present existing world. The most famous icon of Shintoism is the torii gate, roughly meaning in English, where the birds perch, as an invitation to kami. These are entrances of a sacred area, usually a shrine. A person should bow before entering. In Japan, Shinto is about the veneration of the here and now, whilst Buddhism is about the beyond. People from Japan are known to say, Japanese are born Shinto and become Buddhist, as they're more concerned with the beyond and the deceased towards the end of their life and at funerary times. Yet both Shinto and Buddhism are concerned with how to live a good life. Kanagara no Michi, way of the kami, is another term for Shinto, but throughout this work I'm going to use the terms Shinto and Shintoism. The transgressions between the visible worlds, Kenkai, and the invisible worlds, Yukai, are the stories that Miyazaki is most famous for developing, in such worlds as My Neighbor Totoro, Spirited Away, and one could argue Ponyo and Howl's Moving Castle. The term yomi, according to Shinto mythology, is where the dead go to the afterlife. Once a person eats from yomi, it's mostly impossible to return to the land of the living. This is referenced in Spirited Away, when Haku gives Chihiro something to eat when she arrives into the spirit world, and references Persephone eating a pomegranate after being abducted by Hades, which displaces her from returning home. Spirited Away may also refer to the month with the gods, Kami-o-Reizuki, occurring during the lunar calendar month, roughly around October, when all kami go to Izumo Taisha, a famous Shinto shrine. Reikai, rei meaning spirit, refers to a residential realm of the spirits. Reikan is the gift of being able to sense spirits and other phenomena. A reibai is the person who can sense the presence of spirits and other phenomena. Only Mahito and those of his bloodline, such as Natsuko and Hime, could hear the heron until they entered the tower. In Japanese folklore, a spiriting away, kamikakushi, is a term referring to the mysterious disappearance or death of a person that happens when a god takes a person away. Japanese folklore contains numerous tales of humans abducted to the spirit world by kami. In The Boy and the Heron, Mahito, Natsuko, and Hime get spirited away. This is a spiriting away more manipulatively than the spiriting away by kami we see in Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro. As well as the grey heron, the fish and frogs are part of Mahito's spiriting away, who tell Mahito that his mother is alive. Additionally, when Mahito daydreams atop of the stairs, Mahito's mother says to come find her or save her. This is also part of his spiriting away. As precursors to the Boy and the Heron story, Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro are also stories of humans crossing into the invisible world of kami. However, Ponyo and Kiki's Delivery Service are stories that are the opposite of Spirited Away. They are characters from a magical world that join the human world. The West have done so differently in the form of the most famous examples, Wizard of Oz, Alice in Wonderland, and The Little Mermaid. Nausicaa and Princess Mononoke are also a pair of similar environmental princess stories, whereas Howl's Moving Castle perhaps is paired with Laputa, Castle in the Sky. Although The Boy and the Heron is similar to the Spirited Away and My Neighbor Totoro's Spirit Realm story, I think of it more thematically akin to the two war movies from Studio Ghibli, Grave of the Fireflies and The Wind Rises. Whereas The Wind Rises uses dreams as that spirit realm, The Boy and the Heron uses a more overt netherworld, both utilized as a kind of subconscious of their protagonist. But what connects the two is the concentration on reality and the maturity of their handling of grief, as well as the importance of the harsh reality of the world around them. In The Boy and the Heron, the netherworld, as Mahito says, is similar to his real world. There are many things in common, as they are a mirror, and only in Mahito's bedroom scenes do we see a mirror. In Buddhism, bhavana leads to awakening. The correct translation of the Sanskrit word bhavana we translate into English as meditation is better translated as cultivation, causing to be, bringing into being. The relevant Japanese term is shugyo. Through The Boy and the Heron, Mahito's journey is a cultivation of his teachings and his being. To understand that reality and how to live is not just transpired intellectual wisdom from the book his mother left him, but transpired deeply as an individual experience. There are two kinds of meditation: samatha, concentration, and vipassana, insight. The mind is usually clear, but gets muddied with greed, hatred, etc. Ashitaka, in Princess Mononoke, raised this when he said he wants to see with eyes unclouded. Once the mind is clear, they can enter deep states of concentration, known as dhyanas. The Buddha says this is the direct path to purification of beings, for the overcoming of sorrow and lamentation, for the disappearance of pain and distress, for the attainment of the right method, and for the realization of unbinding. In the 14th century, a 15-year-old boy found several texts buried in a cave, one being the 3 chapters of a larger work called Peaceful and Wrathful Deities, that became known in the English-speaking world as the Tibetan Book of the Dead. Though neither is it a book nor a book about death, it's a few chapters from a larger work about rebirth. The chapters of the Tibetan Book of the Dead are a funerary text. Those chapters are known as Great Liberation by Hearing in the Intermediary States, which discuss when the dead enter the bardo, the way of ever-flowing stillness, the island of stillness, a place after death, but before rebirth, a state of suspended reality and transformation. It's technically a place entirely in the mind. The deceased is therefore called a bardo being. The goal is to liberate the mind from samsara or rebirth. In practice, the deceased is being read the text by the living. In The Boy and the Heron, we see something prefigure this when we see one old man beside another old man who appears to be sick or dying. In this practice, the deceased are described from the Book of All Visions, which the deceased's karma is conjuring. In The Boy and the Heron, the idea which the granduncle has of Mahito being able to create a harmonious ideal world is based on the presumption of his karma. In the bardo, the visions of peaceful and menacing deities are manifestations of their own mind. In Kiriko's kitchen, Mahito recognizes that the netherworld is similar to his own. The tower realm is fundamentally a distorted mirror of reminiscences of Mahito's real-world experiences and sights. Likewise, the granduncle's visions created by the meteor are reminiscent of his own experiences from the Meiji era. We see something similar in The Wind Rises, where Jiro shares his dreams with Caproni. The visions, reflective of karma, are also like that of the movie itself, which has familiar recurrences of imagery reminiscent from other Ghibli movies. We saw this already in Spirited Away, where the radish spirit shared the lift with Chihiro and turned an eye to her in exactly the same way Totoro did to Satsuki at the bus stop in My Neighbor Totoro. Likewise, The Boy and the Heron is full of imagery reminiscent of moments altered from previous Ghibli works. Some are similar in composition and drawing due to the same director and studio, but others are clearly references. The earthquake in The Wind Rises, the Tokyo fire recalls the burning of Kobe, and the running townsfolk in Grave of the Fireflies. Mahito also wears the same Japanese maritime self-defense force cap that Sita wears in Grave of the Fireflies, and Kanto also wears in My Neighbor Totoro, two films released as a double feature in 1988. The oceanic world itself reminds us of the oceanic world in Spirited Away that surrounds the bathhouse. The translucent dark people catching the train that Chihiro rides recalls the translucent dark people on the boats in The Boy and the Heron. The arrow that flies to its target with a life of its own reminds us of Ashitaka's arrows that flew to its target in Princess Mononoke. Even the grey heron is similar in design to the bird plane that young Jiro flies at the very beginning of The Wind Rises. When Mahito stares at the blocked-off underground passage, the composition is like Chihiro looking at the entrance to the fairground passageway in Spirited Away. When Mahito touches the heron's illusion of his mother, the water sticks to his hand and his mother sinks away, which reminds us of Howl's body doing the same thing when he got depressed in Howl's Moving Castle. The numbered doorways in The Boy and the Heron recall both the changing doors within Howl's Moving Castle and the magical doorway that the ring shows its bearer that can transgress time to Howl's childhood. Sophie tells young Howl to find her in the future, similar to how Mahito's mother tells him to come find her. The first time we see the granduncle in the tower, above him are constellations that remind us of the spell with dancing shooting stars in Howl's Moving Castle, alluding to the level of power he wields in this realm. Following Natsuko's path that Mahito saw as she left the estate, Mahito and Kiriko enter the wooded path, similar to when Mai enters the wooded area in My Neighbor Totoro. In both cases, it was the gateway and path to the spirit realm. Obviously, the Warawara remind everyone of Princess Mononoke's forest spirits, but in their character also Ponyo's siblings and the dust sprites. The delivery room shide that wrap Mahito remind us of the paper Shikigami, chasing Haku that wrap Chihiro in Spirited Away, and I could go on. The film commences in the year 1942, whilst the rest of the film, from Mahito's perspective, is in 1943. Except the final scene, which is set in 1947. We know this because Mahito says his mother died 3 years into the war. A year later, they left for Tokyo to go to the rural estate, and at the end of the film, Mahito says 2 years after the war, they returned to Tokyo. We also have a chance to see Mahito's 3 or 4-year-old little sibling. It seems that the initial opening of the film is not an air raid bombing by the Americans, but is an enormous fire located distinctly on the hospital where Mahito's mother is. The animation when Mahito is running towards the fire is noticeably different to a Ghibli film. All at one reflects both the psychological state of Mahito, the heat in that reality which would make things look distorted, but it also reminds us of the style of animation from such directors as Satoshi Kon. Both directors, Miyazaki and Kon, explore the transgression from the visible reality to the unseen reality. But whilst Miyazaki tends to augment visible reality with an unseen reality, Satoshi Kon was the director that tends to distort reality. This style of animation, used only in the first scene of the film, in a sense, prepares us for the distorted reality that we are going to experience in the rest of the film. One of the house grannies says she's been at the house for 60 years. She wasn't there when the meteor landed, but she describes it to Mahito's father Shoichi in detail. A meteor crashed to Earth. When the meteor landed, it caused a fire which turned the lake completely dry. The meteor remained there undisturbed for years. After 30 years, the forest had revived and the plants grew over the meteor. It was then that the granduncle decided to explore it and to build his tower around it. Many people died in the building of it. There was an actual meteor that fell to Earth in Japan during the Meiji Restoration era. However, there's something more important about that particular meteorite, as it was a chondritic meteorite, which means it contains primitive materials from the early formation of the solar system billions of years ago. But I think in the narrative there's more historic significance than the literal event of a meteorite crashing. The Meiji era corresponded to the reign of Emperor Meiji, which extended from October 23, 1868 to July 30, 1912, and was succeeded by the Taisho era upon the ascension of Emperor Taisho. The Meiji Restoration era marks the end of Japan's isolationist policies and the beginning of its engagement with Western nations. The shogunate dynasty was driven out and a Western monarchical style of centralized rule was brought in, dismantling the strict class hierarchy, allowing people to choose their own directions of livelihood. The Meiji period went from being an isolated feudal society at risk of colonization by Western powers to the new paradigm of a modern industrialized nation-state and emergent great power, influenced by Western scientific, technological, philosophical, political, legal, and aesthetic practices. This period saw the adoption of Western technologies, military practices, and educational systems, etc., fundamentally transforming Japanese society. As a result of such wholesale adoption of radically different ideas, the changes to Japan were profound and affected its social structure, internal politics, economy, military, and foreign relations. Shinto and Buddhism were separated. The rapid modernization during the Meiji era was not without its opponents, and the rapid changes to society caused many dissatisfied traditionalists from the former samurai class to rebel against the Meiji government during the 1870s, most famously Saigo Takamori, who led the Satsuma Rebellion. However, there were also former samurai who remained loyal while serving in the Meiji government. The meteorite may be a symbol of Western influence on Japan in a period of modernization. The meteorite's arrival and the subsequent appearance of the mystical tower signify a sudden and powerful external influence disrupting the existing order. This mirrors how the arrival of Western powers and technologies disrupted traditional Japanese society during the Meiji period. Just as the meteorite serves as a catalyst for the events in the film, the meteorite's impact symbolizes the beginning of new changes into an existing cultural framework. This seems to arise in other aspects of the film too. The film also shows two distinct artistic styles. This can imitate the two artistic styles of the Meiji Restoration period, the Western-influenced realistic painting, Yoga, and the traditional stylized painting, Nihonga. The film runs for over 40 minutes before Mahito enters the netherworld of the Tower Realm, nearly halfway into the film. We go from a very still and washed-out grounded reality to a vibrantly colourful abstract world full of motion. Miyazaki was captivated by the novel The Ghost Tower. The Ghost Tower has significantly influenced Miyazaki's storytelling and artistic vision. Miyazaki's interest in the book was so profound that he provided artwork and comic pages for an illustrated edition of the novel in 2015. The realm of the tower is a world inspired by the real world, just as magical realism is inspired by an understanding of reality, but expressed in symbols, which encapsulate its meaning. What's interesting is that the world of the Tower Realm seems to be inspired by multiple characters, and the granduncle remarks the difficulty in controlling it as he prefers. It seems many things are creations of its own inhabitants. Though the granduncle created the world, many things are inspired by Mahito's reality, Hime seems to have developed powers herself, and elsewhere Kiriko and the Parakeet King seem to have established a personal sense of duty and free will. Like in nature and human society, each living thing wants to find its own way to thrive. Natsuko describes there was a flooding pouring out of the tower, and the main entrance to the tower collapsed, and the people of the area, whilst investigating the flood, found many passages under the tower. Naturally, we acknowledge later, this flood was the destruction of the tower world as the oceans flooded out just as the parakeets flock out of Mahito's time door. Natsuko's grandfather ordered the tower to be blocked off so no one could wander in. Since the tower was already collapsing, it was then left in disuse, which was the state Mahito found it, and the state young Hime must have found it. The tower can't have collapsed entirely in all time worlds, otherwise Mahito never could have been able to enter it. When Mahito first discovers it, the underground tunnel appears like a cave. Caves have always been associated with the underworld. It is only the top part sticking over the long grass. The feathers disappeared when he came out of the underground tunnel because, as we learn later, that's where the time door is, which he manages briefly to see into the invisible realm because the Heron was luring him there. As he approaches it, it's like a cave closed off with stones and reminds one of Izanagi's bouldering the entrance of the underworld. In many ways, The Boy and the Heron is an archetypal underworld journey. A typical myth of a rescue of someone from the underworld, Mahito needs to learn how to live on, so he has an experience in the opposite of life to learn it, a world of the unborn and dead. In Shinto creation myth, the primordial married deities Izanagi and Izanami stirred the waters that created the first island and populated the world with kami, and their divine children Amaterasu, the moon god Tsukuyomi, and the deity of the seas, storms, and fields Susanoo. There's very much that's paralleled with The Boy and the Heron and Spirited Away. Izanagi is the creator deity of both creation and life in Japanese mythology. He and his sister wife Izanami are the last of 7 generations of primordial deities that manifested after the formation of heaven and earth, receiving a command from other kami to solidify and shape the earth, which then resembled floating oil and drifted like a jellyfish. The couple used a dual spear to churn the watery chaos. The brine that dropped from the tip of the spear congealed and turned into an island named Onogoro. The two descended to the island and, setting up their dwelling, erected a heavy pillar. Izanagi and Izanami are held to be the creators of the Japanese archipelago and the progenitors of many deities. Amaterasu, goddess of the sun, is known as the Queen of Heaven and Creation. She is so revered that the Japanese imperial family is believed to have descended from her, and the emperor was considered a divine ancestor. The most important of Japanese Shinto shrines, the Grand Shrine of Ise, is dedicated to her. The next born, Tsukiyomi, was known as the moon god and ruled the celestial skies with Amaterasu. Izanami died in childbirth with her last child, Kagutsuchi, who burned her alive and sent her to the underworld, where Izanami becomes a kami of death. Izanagi, wishing to see Izanami again, went down to Yomi, the land of the dead, in hope of retrieving her. Izanami reveals that she had already partaken of food cooked in the furnace of the underworld, rendering her return impossible. Izanagi, losing his patience, betrayed his promise not to look at her and lit up a fire, only to find that Izanami is now a rotting corpse. When Izanami herself came in pursuit of him, Izanagi sealed the entrance to Yomi by placing there a huge boulder. Upon his return to the upper world, Izanami washed his face, creating Amaterasu, Sunanu, and Tsukuyomi. Yomi, ruled over by Izanami, then pronounces a curse, vowing to kill 1,000 people each day, to which Izanagi replies that he will then beget 1,500 people every day to thwart her. In Buddhism, there are 6 realms of existence that make up reincarnation. We could divide these also by the characters we meet across The Boy and the Heron. Heaven, the granduncle. Beings in this realm experience great pleasures and have long lifespans, but they are also subject to eventual death and rebirth. Their luxurious existence can lead to attachment and complacency, hindering spiritual progress. Humans, Himi's home. Humans experience a mix of happiness and suffering, and possess the potential for enlightenment. The human realm is considered favorable for spiritual progress because humans, unlike beings in other realms, can achieve enlightenment. Demigod, the grey heron. Asuras are powerful beings who are often consumed by jealousy, strife, and conflict. Despite their powers and pleasures, they are ill-content. Animal, parakeets. This realm is marked by ignorance and servitude. Animals are driven by basic instincts and are often preyed upon by other animals or exploited by humans. Hungry ghosts, buyers. Beings in this realm suffer from extreme hunger and thirst, unable to satisfy either. Hell. This realm is characterized by intense suffering with various types of tortures and durations of suffering. From the granduncle's perspective, this is the real world. Medieval and modern literature has been fascinated with hell because hell is whatever you imagine it to be. But more so, the modern fascination with hell and the underworld is a purely emotional projection of our modern existential disposition. In a sense, this whole film is a review and questioning of the value of that modern existential disposition. Though the film has existential themes, the conclusions it draws about a disposition to life are largely a rejection of existentialism, neither viewing the world existentially as hell, nor seeking consolation from it into a heaven, but rather wishes to embrace the full spectrum of what the experience of life is. There are several gates in Mahito's journey. Shinto gates are the entrances of the spirit worlds. The tunnel with which the grey heron leads Mahito and elderly Kiriko down says above it a quote from the opening lines of Canto 3 from Inferno, a part of Dante's Divine Comedy. "I was raised here by divine omnipotence." Preceding these lines, in Canto 2, "He turned when I had spoken, and at his back I entered on that hard and perilous track," recalls the very image of the grey heron leading Mahito into the tunnel. I have to mention Dante's Divine Comedy, involving the poet Dante being escorted through the levels of hell by his idol Virgil, and then by his love Beatrice. The fact that Miyazaki literally borrowed a line from the book shows he had some interest in Dante's work when working on his script for The Boy and the Heron. However, there are very generic connections between the two. The Tower Realm, though an underworld, certainly isn't a torturous damnation of hell of any Christian kind, and by that effect, Mahito's journey isn't nor similar to Dante's journey from hell to heaven. That Dante meets thousands of famous people of history, as well as Greco-Roman and Abrahamic mythology, is something that has no parallel in The Boy and the Heron. The generic idea of someone who ventures through an underworld is about where that parallel begins and ends. The Falling of the Rose is an introduction to the world that defies our familiar laws of physics we're about to enter. A rose is light and should land softly. Instead, it breaks into pieces like glass and then evaporates into steam like a liquid. Mahito descends through the floor into the Tower Realm, and we see him descending from a stratospheric abyss down to a coastline. The world where Mahito arrives reminds the audience of Japanese islands, which reminds us of the primordial waters of Shinto creation. In addition, the Sanzu River, a mythological river in Japanese Buddhist tradition that acts as a boundary between the lands of the living and the dead. The ships near the horizon when Mahito first arrives to the Tower Realm remind us of the graveyard of aeroplanes we see in Porco Rosso. We see other famous artwork inspired in the film, such as by De Chirico and Magritte. And let's not forget that Disney released their film Destino, a collaboration between Salvador Dali and Walt Disney, in 2003, made more available when Disney released it on Disney Plus in 2020. The netherworld with the meteor as its source is not a dream nor a metaphysical world, but is a living, animate part of the same world in an invisible realm and indeterminate time. Himi says that the stone is not happy with them. The granduncle says he made a contract with it, characterizing the meteor as having sentient life. When Mahito lands, he looks out onto several stone dolmen structures surrounding giant cypress trees, a graveyard on an island whose visual inspiration is clearly the 1886 painting Isle of the Dead by Swiss symbolist artist Arnold Böcklin. Böcklin painted several versions, and the film recalls both the third and the fifth versions, which, as well as the giant cypress trees, have a similar stone-walled entrance and dolmen structures, reminiscent of Stonehenge and dolmens all over Europe, which are speculated to have been used for graves and funerary rites. Miyazaki has used megalithic dolmens before, such as where the wolf gods live in Princess Mononoke. The Oceanic Gate reminds us of the main front entrance Natsuko said Mahito should enter when he arrived at the estate for the first time. There, Mahito saw the yellow golden folding doors at the house like the Golden Gate in the graveyard, and the dolmen structures recall the stones they step up. Mahito reads on the graveyard's golden gate, "All those who seek my knowledge shall die." The line underscores the gravity of Mahito's journey, a journey in some ways that is launched by the pelicans pushing Mahito through the gate, rather than Mahito entering the gate of his own decision. This is dramatically important. Mahito is more or less thrown into these circumstances in the beginning. Young Kiriko has to build up his focus, engagement, discipline, and courage by being a no-nonsense hard worker. So at this moment, it would not be in character for Mahito to undertake such a grave mission by choice in this new and unfamiliar world. As in life, we are often thrown into strange circumstances by forces beyond our immediate control. The act of the pelicans trying to eat Mahito foreshadows in our minds that they will eat the warawara later when we see the pelicans again. I think the saying above the gate is pretty straightforward rather than ambiguous. One cannot know what death is without dying, therefore seeking it must involve death. Alternatively, it's an aspect of self. To attain enlightenment, one must give up the idea of the self. Oneself must perish. Just as death is known by facing death directly, Mahito will need to face his grief on his journey directly too, whilst also highlighting death as an inevitability. This is both another reference to Dante, but also it's a Buddhist concept of non-self, that you will cease to be the self you are now, and the journey Mahito is about to embark on. When Mahito stares into the megalithic dolmen in the graveyard, the piece of music is called The Master of the Tomb. Kiriko says, "This place is filled with the dead." So there is an evident connotation with an underworld. Mahito's journey goes from the ocean to deeper into the center of the meteor, then deeper into the tower close to the granduncle. We see the meteor stone where the parakeets are cooking, located around them in their various layers that recall the flashback of the granduncle wandering around the meteor before he decided to build a tower around it. The meteor in this way reminds us of the rock sites of Cappadocia. So the parakeets are very central to the meteor, which also means the delivery room was in the center of the meteor too. Deeper still is the granduncle's timeless paradisial layer, where the granduncle takes Mahito to see the meteor hovering above a meadow in the wind. As well as being a world of life, death, and reincarnation, a place resembling an underworld that is a timeless place, as well as being a time of multiple times, all in collision with each other, the granduncle says he searched across space and time. So the Tower Realm is also a place where relativity is conceptually manifested. Although the scientific papers on the electrodynamics of moving bodies, which introduced the idea of special relativity and time dilation, were published in 1905, the quantum world is still very relevant in the 1940s. Remember Chapter 4 of the Watchmen comic. This revolution of the quantum universe challenged everyone's concept of the universe under classical or Newtonian physics, taking physics basically from a subjective-orientated one to an objective one. It introduced concepts such as superpositions and entanglement. In Japan, it wasn't just the cultural, political, industrial ideas that were modernizing, it was the very ideas about the universe. It seems that the universe of the granduncle's Tower Realm expands in his creation, but when the parakeet destroys the possibility of its maintenance, it seems to implode, or rather draw into itself like a black hole in space-time, drawing everything into it. Time within the Tower Realm is essentially one time, all time, but many times connected to it outwardly. For any time those doors can open, the tower exists. Therefore, outwardly, the tower is in many different worlds at the same time. It's in quantum superposition. Japan traditionally shows an interconnectedness with the past, present, and future. In Shintoism, Rinne refers to the concept of rebirth, the beginningless cycle of repeated birth from within 6 realms of reincarnation, mundane existence, and dying again. This concept is similar to samsara in Buddhism. In The Boy and the Heron, we see in the hallway doors numbered 401, 829, 145, 748, 558, 415, 132. Further on, there are doors 677 and 184. Mahito, Natsuko, and the Grey Heron go through door 132. Hime and Kiriko go through the door 568. Destruction bookends the film. The ending of the film mirrors the beginning. At the beginning, the fire at the hospital and the image of its flaming collapse. Mahito's horror of his mother dying in the fire. At the end, Mahito witnessing the collapse of the tower and the tower world, hand in hand with Natsuko, with a renewed spirit for living. There is a duality between the real and the realm. Some characters have 2 representations. Hime is both Mahito's mother who died and the young girl Mahito meets in the Tower Realm. Natsuko is a caring and gentle woman in the real world, but an angry, bitter woman in the Tower Realm. Kiriko is an old granny at this state, and also a young Kiriko from the Tower Realm. The grey heron is literally a dual nature of bird and man. Unlike the pelicans, the parakeets are threatening, mindless, hungry monsters, but when they are in the real world, they're harmless, beautiful songbirds. The grannies exist as dolls in the tower realm and as grannies in the real world. There are also real-world duality where the frogs climb up Mahito's body, and in the tower realm, when Mahito is cutting the fish, he is engulfed again by the guts of the fish. In both cases, he wakes up having fainted and laid down to rest. The granduncle hopes that Mahito succeeds him, and so he sees Mahito as a younger version of himself. But there is also the duality of the meteorite stone in the tower realm, which allows the granduncle to create the universe of the tower realm, and the stone which Mahito used to injure himself and draw blood in the real world. Mahito uses the stone to create a situation where he doesn't have to go to school and lies about what happened. The granduncle uses the stone to disappear from reality, but by the end of the film, Mahito realizes that's not the way to live. Above all, there is in this film itself the dual nature of Miyazaki's real life and the world he creates for his films. Something we all love about Studio Ghibli films is that these drawings come to life and have needs that transcend their literal graphic identity. We see them eat, they bathe, they use the toilet, they sleep, they hang out, they clean, they get bored. They behave as people. The principal character that we follow through the story is a boy called Mahito Maki. The name Miyazaki has given to him has meaning. Mahito means genuine human. Kiriko later says his name means sincerity. His surname means shepherd or pasture. We learn his full name because it is written on the chalkboard at his school when his teacher has introduced him to the class. From the opening scene, Mahito awakes from sleep to discover, to his horror, the death of his mother, Hisako, in a hospital fire. This causes a trauma of grief that remains with him. Years pass, and his family move out of Tokyo to a countryside estate to escape the war. Like Japan finding identity in a modern world imposed on it, Mahito is struggling to find identity in his new life. At the time we meet him again, after the title card, we learn that his father, Shoichi Maki, has married Mahito's aunt Natsuko. Whilst Mahito is still grieving over his dead mother, his pragmatic father moved on quickly to remarrying and expects Mahito to adapt to this change as pragmatically as he, and seems to not make consideration for the emotional grief Mahito still experiences. Though Mahito can travel away to the countryside to physically get far from the war, he can't physically get away from his emotional grief. Despite this, his father is shown to be concerned with the well-being of his son, but in terms of how things appear to be. His father is concerned with driving Mahito to school in a car to make him look good. He was concerned with who may have attacked Mahito so he could get revenge. He was concerned that Mahito hadn't visited Natsuko in the house when she was ill. However, Mahito's own emotional needs seem overlooked by Shoichi, beyond appearances. Mahito's purpose and resolve in his mission displaces his existential anxieties. Having a purpose displaces the former overriding emotion. It's important to consider that these are selfless purposes. We see this in Sophie, Setsuko, Chihiro, etc. The closest we get to villains in Miyazaki movies are selfish characters whose ambitions are self-serving. From having a purpose, Mahito accepts the reality he is left with after his mother dies, and resiliently continues to live. Often people show bravery out of necessity. There is a necessary task and you adjust yourself to accomplish it. Logic and emotion have nothing to do with it. They see through reason and danger towards their goal. Mahito feels it's his duty to return with Natsuko. He doesn't feel it's his duty to continue the work of the granduncle. Life goes on. The war is over at the end of the film. The tower has fallen. Life goes on. The initial sense of empowerment comes from several sources. The first is the grey heron, who more than a call to action, antagonizes Mahito to the extent that he wants to confront the heron. Then Mahito wants to know if his mother really is alive. It seems at first Mahito uses the circumstance of Natsuko missing as an excuse to find his mother. Mahito pursues Natsuko after realizing he hasn't seen the grey heron that day. The grey heron already told him his mother is alive, and Mahito says he wants to go into the tower because he was told his mother is alive. Later, young Kiriko sets Mahito to work almost immediately after meeting him, and he seems like a fish out of water, but once he accepts the duty of finding Natsuko, he seems to become more courageous. Mahito fires an arrow with the feathers of the grey heron, which recalls the Aesopian fable of the eagle and the arrow. In the Aesop fable, an eagle is struck by an arrow, and as it's dying, notices that the arrow is feathered with its own plumage. The moral of the fable often highlights the irony and tragedy of being harmed by something which originates from oneself. There may be another reference made by Mahito's bow and arrow. Zuijin, in Shintoism, refers to kami warrior guardian figures. They are often depicted to be holding bow and arrows. The name was originally applied to the bodyguards of the Emperor of Japan. Emperor Jimmu Tenno, was the legendary first emperor of Japan, with his ascension traditionally dated to around 660 BC. The imperial house of Japan traditionally based its claim to the throne on the putative descent from the sun goddess Amaterasu via Jimmu's great-grandfather Ninigi. Emperor Jimmu is conventionally depicted carrying a bow. Hamayumi, literally evil banishing bow, had been used in Buddhist and Shinto rituals of purification. In Japan, some believe that merely the twanging of its bowstring will frighten away ghosts, evil spirits, and negative influences from the house. The hamayumi is considered to be one of the oldest and most sacred Japanese weapons. There are a couple of things worth mentioning about Mahito's character arc, and why he was right not to take over from the granduncle. Throughout the film, Mahito remains a disobedient child. He refuses to listen to the grannies when he first sees the tower and carries on anyway. He injures himself with a stone and then lies about it. His father tells him to visit Natsuko and he doesn't until the grannies also tell him to. When he does, he steals a pack of cigarettes. He tries to kill the heron at first with a club and then with a bow and arrow. He breaks the rules of entering the sacred space where Natsuko is in the meteorite part of the tower realm. Then he picks up one of the stones from the field, despite Himi says he would be better not to. Mahito rejects the invitation from the granduncle to be his successor because he recognizes his own flawed character. At the end of the film, Mahito's father says, "Mahito, let's go." And Mahito says, "Coming," and then goes to meet his family downstairs. We see he's changed. He seems more together emotionally. He doesn't have that reserved, indifferent voice he had at the beginning of the film, and he's less of a brat to others. He's grown up over the 2 years that have passed. In the final scene of the film, we see Mahito place into his bag the book left by his mother Himi. Mahito also seems to reach for something in his pocket and to look at it in the palm of his hand. I assume this is the stone that he kept. He puts it back into his pocket and takes his bags. It shows that after all the time he keeps it with him. Perhaps by looking at it often and keeping it with him, he is able to remember. By keeping the stone and his mother's book as he returns to Tokyo, he's able to honor the past and allow his mother's words and the memory of his mother to help him on his journey forward. It's significant that Mahito returns to Tokyo after the war, as Mahito too has moved emotionally to a new landscape. The name Shoichi means one who wins. Mahito's father is greatly pragmatic and at times audacious, with spontaneous aggression. Mahito's dad served in the military, as we see him in military uniform at the beginning running off to the fire. Now he runs a factory that creates products for the imperial forces' machines of war. That his factory makes things for the army assumes it's paid for by the state, the items of which are repeating products that all look identical and are purely functional. Shoichi's family perhaps belonged to a samurai clan because he carries a katana. It could be an expression of his military connection. During World War II, there was a revival of interest in traditional samurai values and martial spirit, promoted by the Japanese government as part of wartime nationalism. Some military officers, particularly those from families with samurai backgrounds, might have privately owned katanas or even carried them as symbols of heritage and family pride. Shoichi therefore reflects that rapid industrialization that Japan underwent after the Meiji Restoration. Similarly, Mahito's father creates things which are to be used destructively, and he stands in awe of their beauty, essentially privileged by a wealth generated from supplying destruction. Mahito's father is no Jiro. He's no genius of design that happens to have a passion for these machines of destruction. We can even accuse Leonardo da Vinci of that, who used his genius to make many designs for innovative and horrifying war machines. Mahito's father is a businessman. He does what will make money, and does so by supplying the Japanese imperial forces with parts to build their machines of war. That's his contract, similar to how the granduncle has made a contract with the stone. The suffix ko in Japanese means child. Hisako, Natsuko, and Kiriko all have it, as well as all the grannies except Izumi. The grannies, when recalling the origin of the meteorite to Soichi, call Himi by the term Hisako, which means timeless child. The Japanese Wikipedia page also refers to the character as Hisako, not Himi. There is no context to establishing the meaning of the name Himi. It's entirely possible that Himi is a diminutive or affectionate nickname for Hisako, since she's more formally called Lady Himi. It sounds like Hime, which is a suffix meaning princess or royal lady. Divinity are also suffixed with the term Hime. The grannies call her by this name when they are telling Shoichi about when she disappeared and returned, which, as we learn later, is because she went into the tower. This could be for dramatic reasons that the grannies don't call her Himi, as perhaps Miyazaki wanted to confirm she was Mahito's mother later on. After all, Himi is shown in silhouette when the grannies tell the story. But how long had Himi been there? The grannies say she was missing for a year. It certainly was long enough that she learned fire powers, disappearing through walls, and the workings of the tower world. However, if we combine Hisako with the suffix hime, she's called Timeless Princess. Himi, as Mahito's adult mother, dies in a hospital fire at the beginning of the film. There's no explanation for the illness of Himi. Himi could either have been pregnant with a child like Natsuko is, or sick like the mother in My Neighbor Totoro, and thereby reflecting Izanami's death by fire. Ironic to the fire that killed adult Himi, young Himi in the Tower Realm has magical fire powers. Himi rises to the sky in Mahito's daydream vision of the fire. This recalls an impression that the Tower Realm Himi, the name used in association with divinity, is like the sun goddess Amaterasu, hidden in a cave. Narratively speaking, Himi has fire powers in the Tower Realm because Mahito can view her in flames without horror of the thought of her dying in the hospital fire. The image of horror that plagues his subconscious is transformed into an image of empowerment and vitality. In contrast to the hospital fire and Himi's fire power, when Mahito sees the grey heron version of his mum, she becomes water. Contrary to Himi's fire power, the grey heron's power is closer to that of water. Himi and Mahito's journey recalls Spirited Away. Himi with powers, Mahito their journey, Haku magical, Chihiro their journey. There's a beautiful moment when Himi and Mahito are enjoying some food when Himi gives Mahito jam on bread and Mahito says it tastes just like how his mother used to make it. Aside from that there are very few ways to make jam spread on bread, it was a tender moment after you realize Himi is actually his mother at the same age. Though to us all, Mahito should have recognized Himi by her name, no one is going to think a young girl his own age he just met who has magical fire powers to be his own mother. Mahito didn't call his mother Himi, and his mother signs her book, Mother. Mahito got to say goodbye to his mother in the Tower Realm. There is a nobleness that Himi decides to return to her real world of her time, rather than any other time or back with Mahito, because if she didn't, she would not give birth to Mahito. In a sense, what's happened has happened, and inevitably Himi would return to her time because the grannies had already said they remember her returning after going missing. The name Natsuko means summer child or reminiscent child. Natsuko is said by the grannies to look exactly like her sister Himi. Natsuko says she hasn't seen Mahito since he was a little boy. When lying in the country estate's bedroom, Natsuko says she hopes her big sister Himi isn't angry with her, presumably for not somehow preventing Mahito from being injured or marrying and becoming pregnant with her husband after she died. In any case, Natsuko is seeking forgiveness from Himi. Despite the fact that this could be an emotional reason for why Natsuko enters the Tower Realm, Natsuko doesn't need an emotional reason for why she goes alone to the tower. She is drawn there by the kami and is being spirited away. The delivery room of the Tower Realm is encircled by purification paper called shide, or goyi, hanging from shiwanawa rope, literally enclosed rope, to keep evil at bay and purify Natsuko, and also declare that the delivery room is a sacred space. They are set up at groundbreaking ceremonies. Wherever set up, it indicates a ritually pure space. The shide are symbolic of lightning and a symbol of fertility. The style of shide in the film are the Ise temple style. Perhaps Natsuko was supposed to have her baby in the Tower Realm to continue the bloodline dynasty to then take over the granduncle, but the granduncle instead chooses Mahito. When Natsuko touched Mahito's bandage at the side of his head in the house bedroom, we find this distorted when Mahito approaches Natsuko in the sacred delivery room and the shide unwrap him like bandages. Mahito also steps away from Hime to approach Natsuko and ends up returning to Hime, who uses her magic fire powers to burn the paper and encourages Natsuko to stand, only to be struck by the angered stone. The delivery room is a dolmen too. When the image is of Hime holding Mahito in her arms, the background is made up of dolmens also, ones that are even more like the painting Isle of the Dead. Kiriko says that she can give Mahito a real bow and arrow. We see Natsuko has one when Mahito visits her bedroom at the country estate. Natsuko uses it when the frogs crawl over Mahito to scare off the grey heron, which inspires Mahito to create one for himself. But this also mirrors when Hime shoots the flares into the sky to scare off the pelicans. The names of the elderly housemaids of the estate are Izumi, a name meaning fountain or spring, Utako, meaning child of song, Eriko, child of blessing, and Aiko, child of love. When we first meet the grannies, as Mahito calls them, at the house, they remind us of the pelicans when Mahito arrives at the ocean world below. They surround the suitcase, excited by the rare food, like the way the pelicans surround Mahito, excited by meat and fish. This also reveals class disparity at the time, showing what the wealthy have access to and the poorer do not. The element of class struggle, particularly in times of war, is evident in the film and may also ring true of Miyazaki's own feeling in childhood. Whereas everyone in the Tower Realm seems to be striving to survive, all seeking food, the basics of life, the granduncle meanwhile lives in comfort and paradise. Similarly, Miyazaki left Tokyo to the rural countryside during the war, when he was a child and lived apart from the suffering of survival. One imagines this move to the countryside had a profound effect on Miyazaki, since many of his films take place in an idyllic rural landscape. The place of beauty quickly becomes a place of wonder and intrigue as Mahito is drawn to the dark and strange world of the tower, pursuing this by the very creature that embodies the transgression between the beautiful and the ugly. The grannies in the Tower Realm are like any number of Japanese figurines, Daruma dolls, Kokeshi dolls, Kataburi Netsuke, or Amagatsu. But along any of these lines, the wooden figurines are referred to in the film as being amulets that will protect Mahito. We see the grannies at his bedside when sick in real life, and as wooden amulets under Kiriko's kitchen table in the Tower Realm's ocean world. Kokeshi dolls are wooden dolls made to look like people. Aside from looking like Japanese women, men, and children in traditional wear, a key characteristic of Kokeshi dolls is their lack of arms and legs. Their features are painted on, usually with vivid colors like red, purple, blue, or green, and are defined by black ink. While Kokeshi dolls are mostly used as children's toys, they're also symbols of hopes for beautiful harvests, wishes for good luck and fortune, a great appreciation for craftsmanship and culture. Kokeshi dolls continue to be popular. Amagatsu, also known as guardian dolls or hokuhina, literally lowly child dolls, are another type of doll similar in function as an amulet or talisman to the hoku doll, documented back to at least the 11th century, with a mention in the tale of Genji. In the Muromachi era, 1333 to 1568, these figurines were kept by a child's bedside to ward off evil. In later years, the Yamagatsu and Hoku dolls became essentially the same thing, with the dolls more commonly made out of cloth and other soft materials. As well as elderly women in the house, there are also elderly men. In the house, there is a smoking pipe man watching over a sick man in bed. I'm unsure what the function of this is to Mahito, who stares away from the grannies and Natsuko to the opposite side of the room to view this. The man lying down doesn't look hugely unlike the smoking man with the pipe. Perhaps Mahito sees in them life and death in their pairing. We first meet elderly Kiriko as one of the grannies in the house, but in the Tower Realm, young Kiriko says she has lived in the Tower Realm oceanic world for as long as she can remember. The name Kiriko means child of the mist, which could reflect that she's from the seas of the Tower Realm for as long as she can remember, and perhaps relating to her duty to the Warawara. On the boat, young Kiriko described to Mahito a previous adventure she had that gave her an identical scar on her head that Mahito has on his own. At the end of the film, young Kiriko leaves through the same door as young Hime, and elderly Kiriko left the door with Mahito as an amulet in his pocket. Despite young Kiriko being from the Tower Realm, she forgot about it because, according to the Grey Heron, when you leave, you forget. This makes it very ironic that elderly Kiriko was afraid to approach the Tower Realm with Mahito when they first approached it, and even afraid to walk down the path between the forest. Not only because Kiriko is from the Tower Realm, but because of all the courageous adventures she did in that realm. She has forgotten herself in the real world. Maybe Mahito brings that piece of stone because he mustn't forget the courage he's acquired and meaning to live on. Inside the Tower Realm, Kiriko lives on a washed-up ship overgrown with plants like Castle in the Sky. I first thought the big ship Kiriko lives in may simply be a ship because she is a sailor, so it fits her character. Alternatively, it could be Takarabune, treasure ship, a mythical ship piloted through the heavens by the 7 lucky gods during the first 3 days of the new year. A picture of the ship forms an essential part of traditional Japanese New Year celebrations. However, it appears it is a reference to Noah's Ark. I was dubious at the idea of recalling Noah's Ark, but Joe Hisaishi named the musical piece for that segment Ark, which is pretty on the nose to reject any other interpretation. Of course, Miyazaki pulls from different mythologies. The character San from Princess Mononoke is raised by wolves, which borrows from the Roman founding myth. Chihiro's parents turning into pigs and spirited away comes from Homer's Odyssey on the island of Circe. Haku giving Chihiro something to eat to remain in the spirit world comes from Hades' abduction of Persephone. Haku telling Chihiro to not look back when she leaves the spirit world recalls Orpheus leaving the underworld to revive Eurydice. In the Tower World, Kiriko lives with unborn Warawara and amongst the buyers. Kiriko represents the teacher, a supervising figure, a guru or a lama. Kiriko's clothing in both realms is covered with patterns of the Bhava Chakra, or the Wheel of Becoming, which is a visual representation of samsara often found in Buddhist temples, a visual representation of the 6 realms of reincarnation. In Buddhism, the cyclical movement of a wheel is also used to symbolize the cyclical nature of life in the world as the wheel of samsara. The cycle emphasizes that all realms are impermanent and that liberation from this cycle, known as nirvana, is the ultimate goal of Buddhist practice. In Buddhist texts and rituals, the phrase turning the wheel of the law refers to the act of teaching by the Buddha Shakyamuni. Each of the 8 spokes and the 8 corners represents one of the moral admonitions of the Noble Eightfold Path, and the central section depicts a lotus flower with 8 petals. In Buddhism, the Dharma Chakra is widely used to represent the Buddhist Dharma, Buddha teaching and the universal moral order, Gautama Buddha himself, and the walking of the path to enlightenment since the time of early Buddhism. The symbol is also sometimes connected to the 4 Noble Truths, the Noble Eightfold Path, and dependent origination. The Buddha is said to have set the wheel of Dharma in motion when he delivered his first sermon. The turning of the wheel signifies a great and revolutionary change with universal consequences, brought about by an exceptional human being. This wheel, which the Buddha turned, is primarily understood as wisdom, knowledge, and insight. The wisdom has 2 aspects: the wisdom of self-realization of the truth, and the wisdom of proclamation of the truth. The word warawara is an onomatopoeia for a speech referring to something bustling, shuffling, squirming, and for creepy-crawly things. The warawara are those who are to be reborn in the visible world. This is the samsara cycle of existence and rebirth, watched over by Kiriko, who wears an outfit decorated with symbols of the Dharma wheel. Kiriko watches over the warawara and provides them with fish guts to give them the strength to fly up to the human world where they are reborn. Kiriko serves fish soup, so I assume the warawara ate fish gut soup also. It's a plausible idea that they eat fish guts because the bowels were once seen as the center of one's life force, one's essence of being. In it contained the purity of the soul. It was where people believed babies were born. This recalls Chinese mythology, where the route to reincarnation is marked by the Naihei Bridge, which souls must cross in order to be reincarnated. On the bridge is Lady Meng, or Meng Po, who provides soup to erase the memory, so that the souls can be reborn into their next life without the burdens of their previous life. Go check out Brainless Mastermind's wonderful video on The Boy and the Heron, which is where I first came across that fun fact. In real-world symbolism, the warawara are like grains of rice that by diffusion absorb water and expand. In Shinto beliefs, rice is considered a sacred gift from the kami. Inari, the deity associated with rice, fertility, and prosperity, is one of the most worshipped deities in Shinto. Offerings of rice are common in rituals and ceremonies, emphasizing its sacred nature. If we think back to the book How Do You Live, which Mahito finds left by his mother, the picture inside the book is a person sowing rice. But more importantly, the grains of rice are a symbol of life and creation. Since the warawara are to be born into people, and not all of them succeed in their journey, they clearly resemble the idea of sperm. In this sense, they resemble a particular Japanese delicacy called shirako, derived from the sperm sacs of male fish. Before you get grossed out, just think about what caviar is. The warawara are divine semen. The translucent men in the boats Kiriko calls the buyers are both like preta in Buddhism and gaki in Shintoism, both literally meaning the hungry ghost. In Buddhism and Shintoism, the realm of hungry ghosts is the second lowest realm in the wheel of reincarnation, described in Hinduism and Buddhism, Taoism and Chinese folk religion as undergoing suffering greater than that of humans, particularly at an extreme level of hunger and thirst. Preta are believed to have been false, corrupted, compulsive, deceitful, jealous, or greedy people in a previous life. As a result of their karma, they are afflicted with an insatiable hunger for a particular substance or object. During the Ghost Festival and other festivities, rituals may include buying and releasing miniature paper boats and lanterns on water, which signifies giving directions to the lost ghosts and spirits of the ancestors and other deities. The development of the concept of the praetor started with just thinking that it was the soul and ghost of a person once they died, but later the concept developed into a transient state between death and obtaining karmic reincarnation in accordance with the person's fate. In order to pass on to the cycle of karmic reincarnation, the deceased's family must engage in a variety of rituals and offerings to guide the suffering spirit to its next life. If the family does not engage in these funerary rites, which last for 1 year, the soul could remain suffering as a praetor for the rest of eternity. We learn across the film that the granduncle made a contract with the stone and created the Tower Realm. The idea of the contract seems to be a Faustian contract, where in order to have this power, the granduncle must make certain sacrifices and take on certain duties. Natsuko says Mahito's great-granduncle was very intelligent and read too much, reference to Don Quixote. There is much in the premise to the granduncle's character of both Faust and Don Quixote. However, I feel the granduncle most closely resembles Shakespeare's Prospero from The Tempest. If we look at the photographs of the granduncle, when Natsuko is telling Mahito about her granduncle, that on the left side of the central collection of photographs is a picture of the granduncle in very European clothing, whilst on the right side of the central collection of photographs we see possibly their grand-aunt, in very Japanese clothing with her family. In the central collection we see 4 pictures, an image of what seems to be the granduncle in Europe, an image of the married couple, and there seems to be a Japanese folding screen behind them, so one assumes it's in Japan. an image of a large ship, and considering the granduncle is dressed in Western military attire, one assumes he was in the Navy. The centralmost image is a small portrait of the granduncle. It's clear that he has Western features. Cinema Tokyo pointed out that Lafcadio Hearn, 1850 to 1904, may be the model for the granduncle. Lafcadio Hearn, also known as Koizumi Yakumo, after becoming a Japanese citizen, was a Greek-Irish writer who significantly influenced Western understanding of Japanese culture. Hearn also married a Japanese woman, and their family crest was a grey heron. Hearn's lifetime spans the period of the Meiji Restoration era of the granduncle's real time. Hearn moved to Japan in 1890. By this time, Japan had already undergone substantial modernization efforts, including the adoption of Western technologies and institutions. To Westerners reading his work, his writings provided valuable insights into the rapidly changing Japanese society of the Meiji era, and preserved aspects of traditional Japanese culture that were at risk of being overshadowed by modernization. However, it's worth noting that his writings are also a syncretic nature of Japanese spirituality, where Shinto and Buddhism coexist and complement each other. It reminds me of what Kubrick said about the room at the end of 2001: A Space Odyssey, which was to Kubrick, as if aliens had tried to replicate a human world, they would take bits from all over the place and time and put it together rather than replicate the design aesthetic of a specific moment in time. Similarly, the Tower world is a flawed world and a mix of various traditions, mixing memory and fascination. Hearn's unique background and deep immersion into Japanese society and folklore make him a fitting inspiration. We know from Natsuko's story that the granduncle who built the tower is the brother of one of Himi's parents. When the granduncle disappeared, he left a book open. So did Mahito. The granduncle was luring Mahito to his tower realm because he is concerned with having someone take over his legacy, and brought Natsuko, Himi, and Mahito all at different points in their lives and timelines together. So let's talk genealogy. Himi and Natsuko are sisters and grandnieces of the granduncle. Despite Himi appearing younger than Natsuko in the Tower realm, Himi is actually the elder sister. Their mother, who passed away when Himi is still young, was the granduncle's niece. In other words, the granduncle is the brother of both Himi and Natsuko's grandparents. I want to slightly digress into a detail that shows how far Miyazaki has thought his story through. The fact that both Himi and Natsuko have green eyes means it's likely it was their mother who had inherited the recessive gene for green eyes, just as Himi and Natsuko have green eyes. From this, it's likely Himi's grandparent would have had green eyes too, as the granduncle is their uncle, who we see has green eyes, which have faded in his old age. However, Mahito has brown eyes, and this is because Mahito's father has brown eyes, since green is a recessive gene and brown is a dominant. Therefore, no matter that Himi has green eyes, Mahito's genetic makeup would have to be either BB or BG. In either case, Mahito will have brown eyes. Miyazaki had considered the genetic principles of his character's eye color. As mentioned earlier, the meteor arrived from an unknown place and landed in the countryside of Natsuko's family home. Obviously, both Mahito and Natsuko's family are high society, but the countryside house is part of Natsuko's side of the family, not Shoichi's, because Himi was there as a young girl. After the meteor landed, 30 years later, the granduncle built the tower around it in the Meiji Restoration era. I think it's also interesting that the granduncle has power over the dreams that people have in the tower realm. Mahito meets the granduncle for the first time during his dream, and the events that take place are true events between the two. This recalls a lot of the polytheistic mythology where a divinity appears in a dream that compels the character to think or do something in their real waking life. My first thought is in Homer's Iliad, where Zeus enters the mind of a dream of Agamemnon, urging him to resume attacking the Trojans. In Shinto mythology, kami spirits often communicate with individuals through dreams, guiding them or conveying important messages. The founder of Kabuki theatre was said to have been inspired by the goddess Amaterasu in a dream. similar to the ancient Greek dramatist Aeschylus, after falling asleep in a vineyard as a young boy, was said to have been visited by Dionysus, who told him to turn his attention to composing tragedy, and when he awoke, he decided to become a tragedian. If we think about how Miyazaki depicts lords of these spirit realms, if we compare Laputa's descendant lord Colonel Musca, Ponyo's Sea Lord, and the Boy and the Heron's Meteor Lord, we find that they are trying to restore power or preserve balance, and yet this is contrary to anything sustainable long term. Ukiyo, or the sorrowful world in medieval Japan, was associated with Buddhism and originally meant the transient, unreliable world. This term emphasized the suffering and impermanence of earthly existence, from which Buddhists sought release. However, during the Edo period, the term Ukiyo evolved to mean the floating world, and this new interpretation represented the ephemeral, pleasure-seeking lifestyle that flourished in the urban centers of Edo, now Tokyo, Osaka, and Kyoto. The floating world referred to the entertainment districts, the tea houses, kabuki theaters, the brothels, where people sought to escape from their daily life. The artistic genre, ukiyo-e, meaning pictures of the floating world, emerged from this cultural context. Ukiyo-e artists created woodblock prints and paintings that depicted scenes from the floating world, capturing the beauty, fashion, and activities of these entertainment districts. These artworks not only provided a visual record of the period's popular culture, but also highlighted the fleeting nature of pleasure and the transient moments of life. Change is necessary in the sense of being inevitable, and to restrict it is unnatural. They all must learn to let go, yet they are lords of the environment of that nature, but they are unwise fundamentally. The granduncle cannot prevent change and cannot preserve virtue. Life and reality must co-mix and be allowed to flow as it wishes. That both Natsuko and the grannies agreed that the granduncle disappeared in the tower and was never seen again suggests that he died inside the tower. Also, Himi turning to look back at everything being pulled into the abyss of space-time, weeping profusely while saying, "Thank you for everything, granduncle," and falling to her knees with her hands covering her eyes to be helped up by Mahito, all seems to point to that the granduncle meets a Faustian end, but it's open to interpretation. The physical objects of the building blocks are basically children's building blocks, the kind that you might nowadays see in a dentist's waiting room to entertain young children. Creativity is an adult who hasn't forgotten the child at play. The image of an old man stacking children's building blocks is the granduncle as a creative man. In this case, they are not colored but white, suggesting they have a sacred purpose, but they are also used to represent the precarious balance of the universe that the granduncle has created. To take a more sacred approach to it, stacked stones are commonly found at Shinto shrines. Around a shrine are sometimes piles of stacked rocks of varied shape and size, created by worshippers wishing for good luck. Belief has it that if you knock over a pile of stones, you need to build two to atone for your clumsiness. The stacked stones also continue the recurrence of dolmens, since dolmens are themselves balanced stacked stones and have a sacred meaning. In the case of Stonehenge, certainly astronomical meaning. In The Boy and the Heron, the first time we see the granduncle, he has 7 stacked stones, which in my opinion are a metaphor for ideals. Perhaps the 7 virtues of Bushido. The Bushido code was given to school students in the Meiji Restoration era as part of the reformed schooling. The granduncle leads Mahito to the meteor and asks him to choose an 8th block for the stack, perhaps 8 referring to the Eightfold Path of Buddhism. Every religion worldwide has a set of virtues that are not vastly different, as generally accepted behaviors that lead to moral excellence are common. Though Mahito knows where to place the 8th piece, he declines to choose from any of the offered pieces. Later, when Mahito is captured by parakeets, Mahito dreams that he walks through a tunnel leading through a trapezoidal gateway into the granduncle's personal realm, recalling the trapezoidal doorway within the Great Pyramid of Giza, more underworld connotations. Later, Mahito enters one whilst awake, and from there, Mahito has to go through another wooden double door that appears to him to enter. Mahito begins with distress or suffering, but at the end, he experiences awakening. Rather than the Buddhist Eightfold Path, a code that became lessened in the Meiji era, Mahito seems to go on a journey of Bushido virtues to his awakening. But why does the granduncle say he searched across space-time and found 13 blocks free from malice? Why not 8 again? The stones don't just represent the granduncle's idealism, they also represent Miyazaki's view of idealism, which I think is quite a critical view, and in some respects views the granduncle's ambitions as naive. The 13 stones may be a criticism of Western idealism. Benjamin Franklin had a moral code of 13 virtues. Franklin wrote, "On the whole, though I have never arrived at the perfection I had been so ambitious of obtaining, but fell short of it, yet as I was, by the endeavour, a better and a happier man than I otherwise should have been if I had not attempted it." Miyazaki, in stating he is not religious, considers idealism to be a rejection of reality in favour of only a slice of it. Some have proposed the idea of the 13 stones in The Boy and the Heron as being Miyazaki's 13 films, from Future Boy Conan to The Boy and the Heron, similarly to how Fellini named his work 8.5 as it was his 8.5 film. However, The Boy and the Heron is Miyazaki's 12th film, as Future Boy Conan was a TV series, not a film. And if we include Miyazaki's non-feature-length work, then we'd have to include short films, which takes it above 13. This idea seems also a little too self-referential to be accurate. It would imply that Miyazaki to be thinking his films are the only good works to be found across space and time, and then the Parakeet King cuts them in half, so I don't align with that particular view. The granduncle is offering Mahito the opportunity to create a perfect fantasy world, free from suffering. The granduncle says, depending on what stones are chosen and how they're stacked, the Tower Realm world will be either a beautiful gem or an abomination. Not forgetting, Mahito staring at the dolmens when he arrived to this Tower Realm, stacked stones like Stonehenge, with a music Joe Hisaishi named Master of the Tomb. Compared to the wooden ark that the Warawara were reborn into, the real world, Mahito says that he wants pieces made of wood, not stone, and that he can sense their malice. The granduncle is pleased with Mahito's answer. Recall that the book How Do You Live by Genzaburo Yoshino, which the film draws its title from, was written by a political prisoner during their 18th month imprisonment over socialist ideals. In The Boy and the Heron, another Buddhist concept overtakes overtly here. The granduncle lives in this fabricated, created world, aspiring to create a world without suffering, immorality, and ugliness. But the error is that this is to live by idealism, which is not to live in reality. Idealisms are like stacked stones that will always come crashing down in the face of reality. Mahito becomes wiser than the granduncle because finally he chooses to live in a world not of idealism, but as it is. Mahito declines, pointing to the self-inflicted wound on his head. He has come to understand that suffering is an essential aspect of life and rejects the lie of the pursuit of an idealistic sanitized perfection. The granduncle is an idealist. Mahito realizes that idealism is no way to live. He must live in a world of contradictions, an admixture of beauty and ugliness, of joys and suffering, of the knowledgeable and the unknown. The world he departed when he entered the tower. Nothing of that world has necessarily changed, only Mahito's perspective of it. The world of the tower is only able to remain due to the balance of the stones because it's a world made up of idealism. The granduncle was trying to create a perfect society, but that can only rest on ideals. Whether it comes from the benevolence of the granduncle or the fearing, power-hungry Parakeet King, there can be no good way to rule that is controlled by ideals for a future. Instead, it must be allowed to grow and be managed as it comes. In criticism of the Parakeet King, the film seemed to suggest that falling under the charisma of one person's direction would make everyone like the parakeets. The parakeets are also idealizing their king, whereas the great-granduncle represents a bloodline dynasty. Neither the parakeet's imperial villainy nor the emperor's benevolent ideals were sustainable. The Parakeet King cuts through the stones, and the ideals are destroyed. The world collapses. To quote Nietzsche, I do not set up any new idols. May old idols only learn what it costs to have legs of clay. How do you live? Not by ideals. There is no true humanity in them, hence Mahito's name, True Human. Although the film makes us think of Dante's Divine Comedy, Alice in Wonderland, or The Wizard of Oz, Mahito's arc is similar to Geppetto's arc in Pinocchio, or at least Guillermo del Toro's adaptation of it. Narratively speaking, both Mahito and Geppetto move through their grieving over a death, Mahito his mother Hime, Geppetto his son Carlo, into a period of processing that grief by a fantastical artistic period, and moving on by accepting what was lost, and accepting the world as it is. The heron, or sagi in Japanese, has been in the literature, art, and folklore mythology of Japan for millennia. Common characteristics of the heron are that the heron flies alone and represents introspective soul-searching. Unlike its cousin, the crane, which symbolizes peace, luck, longevity, the meaning in the heron's appearance is more mysterious, tied to spirits, gods, death, and a link to another world. In Japanese artistic and literary work, herons often appear around death. While herons noted for their striking appearance are often depicted in stories and ukiyo-e prints, acting as messengers of the gods or symbolizing purity and transition. When other herons appear, like the grey heron, their appearance may be more foreboding. In fact, an ornithologist wrote an entire book exploring why Japanese people find grey herons, like the one in The Boy and the Heron, creepy or melancholy in comparison to their more positive image abroad. When we first see the heron, he stands atop an onigawara, a type of roof ornamentation found in Japanese architecture. They are generally roof tiles or statues depicting a Japanese ogre, oni, or a fearsome beast. Prior to the Heian period, similar ornaments with floral and plant designs, hanagawara, preceded the onigawara. The present design is thought to have come from a previous architectural element, the oniita, which is a board painted with the face of an oni, and was meant to stop roof leaks. During the Nara period, the tile was decorated with other motifs, but later it acquired distinct ogre-like features and became strongly tridimensional. Onigawara are often mostly found on Buddhist temples. Despite the tile's name, the ogre's face may be missing. When we first see the heron, it stands atop the house directly on an oni sculptural head, ironically made to keep the evil spirits and bad luck at bay. When Mahito enters the estate, we see a pair of sliding doors decorated with shishi, lion dogs, which are symbols of guardians and protection against evil, usually found at Buddhist temples and Shinto shrines. The background on these paintings is gold, which in art is an indicator of the spiritual and divine realm, which foreshadows Mahito's transcendence into a spiritual realm, especially as the doors are open and descend back as if a tunnel. Traditional symbolism of pelicans is focus, persistence, and self-infliction. The pelicans say they have no food, and there's barely any fish in the ocean, whereas the parakeets eat anything except pregnant women. In a sense, they remind us of the grannies pining over the suitcase and the cans of food because they can't get any of that food anymore, sugar and cigarettes included. The pelicans are noble, but they got desperate, turning to eat the warawara. A significant pelican in The Boy and the Heron, voiced by Willem Dafoe, is called by the grey heron as the noble pelican. They are the opposite of the parakeets. This ties back to the transitional era of the Meiji Restoration period of the granduncle. The Meiji Restoration, which began in 1868, marked the end of the feudal system and the dissolution of the samurai as a legal class. This included the formal abolition of their privileges and the prohibition of wearing swords in public, known as the Haitorei Edict of 1876. The samurai were becoming a redundant class. In the Meiji Restoration, the samurai were no longer the top of the social strata. After 1870s, the emperor had ceased to pay their pension, and no one looked to them as the honorable defenders of Japan. No one looked to the samurai with honor anymore. They were isolated, masterless mercenaries, had lived by a code that was becoming outdated by modernization and turning into bureaucrats. This was an era of industrial warfare and conscription armies. The idea of a noble nature of warfare that might even be seen in Kurosawa's Seven Samurai or Homer's Iliad is not only a thing of the past, hence the pelicans in the graveyard, but was never a representation of the reality of the suffering of war. There is a vast discrepancy between the ocean world and the areas closer to the granduncle. This imitates the poverty of the agricultural lower classes and the wealth of the emperor, particularly during the shogunate era of Japan. As we see the pelicans struggling to feed, and yet we compare this later with all the food the parakeets are eating. The sea, being water, should be purification, but the pelicans say it's cursed. The pelicans try to fly beyond the ocean world to the living, but can't surpass it to break free, until the tower eventually collapses at the end. Real-life parakeets prefer to fly in large flocks, and as a member of the parrot family, they copy what another says. The parakeets are the national conscription army of the Imperial Japan era. They are not the noble pelicans, who are the samurai. The parakeets are the imperial soldiers, the unthinking masses who blindly follow a charismatic, self-mythologizing leader, which led to fascist dictators in the early 20th century, but also a present problem of present-day populist politics. The parakeets have no bearing of virtue or code of honor as the samurai have. Instead, their bearing and anchorage is the leader they follow. This very much relates to Mahito, as he doesn't see the granduncle in this way that the parakeets see their parakeet king. Mahito thinks for himself and questions insightfully the value of what's before him and speaks his own mind. A very interesting dilemma the Japanese faced and have thrived in is the problem of undergoing rapid modernization, which the West provided the example, whilst remaining Japanese in identity. The late Japanese theatre director Yukio Ninagawa felt he was forever searching for an identity that was truly Japanese, believing that in the modern era of Japan it hadn't really had one because modernization was a term essentially synonymous with westernization. It's a fascinating dilemma. How do you modernize whilst retaining a Japanese identity? Especially in the context of the Second World War from when Japan was under American occupation. We see this frustration in The Wind Rises, where Jiro's friend is often complaining that Japan is stuck in the past, to which Jiro doesn't pay any attention because the answer isn't to fall into the trap of imitation, but to pursue one's own curiosity and talent. And I think the Japanese triumphed over that dilemma. By the end of the century, everyone thought Japan made the best stuff, and today retain a remarkable reputation for the quality of craftsmanship. However, the one key thing that separated Japan from the Western Europeans was the emperor. So when the Japanese pursued modernization and its synonym with westernization, this included the political ambitions which Western nations pursued: empire. Modernization also meant becoming an imperial power, which led to further internal dilemma about national identity. This led to a Japanese military that wanted to free themselves from Western influence, which led to 20th century imperial fascism in Japan that conquered many areas of Southeast Asia. The parakeets represent the aggressive military state, seeking a coup d'etat. The parade of the parakeet military in celebration is in stark contrast to the real-life military parade at the start of the film, which occurs with silent spectators. The parade is similar to the parade in Howl's Moving Castle, and since the movie is staged in a kind of Victorian medieval mixed European city, the parakeets are a resemblance of the Western influence in increasing their military strength and styling. Now, let's talk about bird poo. Why all the bird poo? The same reason the sea is full of garbage and ponyo. Reality is messy. Any analysis of the film wouldn't be complete without talking of the beautiful music of the film. The music for the film was written by Miyazaki's longtime collaborator Joe Hisaishi, real name Mamoru Fujisawa. The main theme for The Boy and the Heron derives from a piece of music Joe Hisaishi wrote for Hayao Miyazaki for his 81st birthday. Miyazaki was so taken with it that he listened to it on repeat and requested it to become the main theme for the film. The relationship between music and image in this film is akin to other great visionary composer collaborations such as Sergio Leone and Ennio Morricone, or Tim Burton and Danny Elfman, or Federico Fellini and Nino Rota, who in each case the composer creates the world of the director and the director populates the music with the world. More than scoring a scene setting, it's as if the visuals are to accompany the music as much as the music are to fill the visuals with a feeling. With The Boy and the Heron, there is something of Rachmaninoff in the music. Rachmaninoff's Opus 29, titled Isle of the Dead, feels like an obvious musical reference. The music is colored by solemnity and loneliness in the beginning, and increasingly, through the Tower Realm, the music begins to grow with wonder and to flourish in instrumentation and dynamics. We also find this with the washed-out color palette of the real world, contrasting with the vibrant color palette of the Tower Realm world. I really encourage you to search YouTube for a video titled The Music of the Boy and the Heron, Hisaishi's Minimalist Masterpiece, because it's a brilliant study on the film's music. Cinema Tokyo pointed out at the end credits, the kanji in Hayao Miyazaki's name had been changed to another character with the same sound, and interpreted this as if Miyazaki had been reborn. When Miyazaki was asked in a Forbes interview about the answer to the title of his film, How Do You Live?, Miyazaki responded with, "I am making this movie because I do not have the answer." Artists and writers are often frustrated by having to explain their work. A novelist, whom I can't remember the name of, when asked to explain the meaning of their book, replied, "If I could explain it in a sentence, I wouldn't have spent 300 pages writing it." Artists communicate what they have to say through their work. Art means more to us when we discover something about ourselves in discovering its meaning. But I also think to have a concrete answer to that question would undermine the film's meaning. As to have an answer would make one strive for that idealistic state of perfection. But The Boy and the Heron shows that one ought to embrace life as it is, life as it comes to you, and not try to sanitize, console, or escape from it, but to embrace it in its full spectrum of contradictions. The film finds a balance between the beautiful and the ugly, the suffering and the triumph of life. The whole movie embodies a fascinating dilemma that artists and writers grapple with. Do you want to create work for people that are sanitized representations of reality with a constellation of romanticism, or a work representing life worse than it is commonly, that depicts life with unbearable displeasure, in the demeaning representation of melodrama, or something else, something in between and across it all? And to those, Miyazaki presents us with an inspired answer to the question, how do you write?